Welcome to Different Gravy, not just another Sheffield Wednesday podcast. I'm one of the hosts, Richard Miller, and my co-host was a good boy and actually did his homework this week, unlike me, teacher's pet, Dr. Luke Gledall. How are you doing today, Luke?
I'm doing okay, Rich. How are you?
Doing okay. I'm all right, yes. A bit tired. I feel like maybe I've got some sort of cold going. I'm sort of gradually re-engaging with the world, and I suspect what is going to come with that is a side of germs that we've not been exposed to for a year because we've been bunkering down. So I suspect there's going to be lots of little sniffles and things like that aren't COVID, but will give us enough pause to worry. I think that's going to be the way of things for the next few months at least. But you're generally you're well?
Generally, I'm well. Welcome to Different Gravy, the podcast with enough pause to worry.
Yeah, that's, I mean, what else can you say? One thing we're not going to be talking about in any great detail today or at any stage in the podcast is the Euros. Would you like to briefly summarize why we're not talking about the Euros, Luke?
Because I think international football is tedious and pap. That's why, Rich.
Oh, fair enough. Yeah, I disagree, but that's fine. You know, this is... We live or die by decisions made together on this podcast. So I'd love to spend the next 20 minutes drooling about Billy Gilmore and the fact that he is basically Jesus, Allah and Buddha put together and in a little package that looks like a 10-year-old boy. But we're not going to do that. We're going to move on as swiftly as we can and take in some questions from the listeners. We're also the sort of the big chunk of today, and what I alluded to in the intro is that we're going to discuss the book 91, the inside story of Sheffield Wednesday's 1990-91 season by local journo Alex Miller. So we're going to do a bit of a dive into that and sneak preview. Luke finished the book. I have struggled. But that will be probably make up part of what we talk about. But first off, yeah, we've had a couple of emails from listeners that we want to take in and have a little chat about. So the first one to come through was from Benjamin. I won't say your second name just in case you're not cool with us reading that out. I should probably check these things ahead of time. But we get the sort of slightly backhanded compliment that he wasn't particularly convinced by the podcast at first, but we did grow on him like some sort of mold or cancerous growth, which is lovely.
That's fine, Benjamin. I mean, it took a long time to grow on us as well. You know, the podcast we do ourselves.
Yeah. I'm still 50-50 on whether or not I like me. I'm pretty big fan of you, Luke, but
I will do the same. So we'll probably be just over halfway there, I guess.
Yeah.
When we pull those together.
But his question sort of alludes to, and I think naturally there's feelings and looking at the Chancery project or era as a whole, and his question is, did we have the same negative feelings that he had around the start of the Chancery era when we were spending big amounts of money on players and not really trying to put more into the club? So training ground, match day experience, the ground itself, in order to sort of lay stronger foundations going forward. And then he goes on to say, if so, what would you rather have seen that money being spent on? So did you share that sort of negativity at the beginning, Luke, or were you swept up in the excitement of things?
I think because the thing is that, like, early on, you're swept up in the excitement of the fact that we're actually spending top dollar on some, exciting players or exciting prospects just because of what you think they're going to give to us as a team. So as part of that project, I think early on, it wasn't something that kind of irked me straight from the beginning. But the thing is, I don't know. It's a bit like I've used this quote before. The best time to plant a tree is 20 years ago. The second best time is today.
That's a good quote.
It is the top one. But I think it kind of really speaks to the fact that, we're now here looking back and looking at just the sheer level of missed opportunities. And I think that's kind of the thing that, like, our view is, and I think that definitely what Benjamin is sharing with us in that email, is it's a missed opportunity because we've not spent the time to plant any real trees X number of years ago. And it adds up with all the expenditure and the top budgets that we spend to be here. I mean, it's an interesting thing that we have an owner who has previously made a very difficult time on the kind of PR relation side to be like, hey, we're going to increase ticket prices, but then kind of be like, well, your money doesn't really pay for anything.
Yes.
So I think that's a big thing, like, especially like, Benjamin brings up the match day experience. We don't really know what that could be. I mean, it might be something small on a sheet that you print out when we hilariously think back to that QPR documentary we looked at a couple of weeks ago. But it means so much more to us as fans, right?
Yes. Yeah.
We don't know where positivity can spread. We don't know what it can grow into. You might think it means very less, but I think we're in a situation where so many Wednesdayites feel incredibly disengaged with this football club.
Yeah. Which part of that is being told, your money doesn't buy anything, which we, again, as you say, we saw that in the QPR, they spend 10 quid and they think they can tell me off kind of thing. It's a really unhelpful attitude for everybody. It's an interesting question because I think early doors, I have to probably admit, I was fairly excited and swept up in that excitement. And I remember exchanging texts with you saying, particularly around Forestieri and his early performances, and just saying, like, I can't believe he's ours. Not just having a player like that on loan for a season, but having them as our player was really, it just unimaginably exciting for that initial period of time.
But naturally, again, as part of that, we've not seen the kind of, this is old stuff to say, but we've not seen the maximization of player sales. That, like, it's not purely just a rocket going upwards. No. It has a series of ebbs and flows. It's a kind of like a slightly wave. So, interesting that, typically to kind of look across in the championship at the time at like clubs like Brentford and think, well, it hasn't worked for them. And then probably even more hilarious is the fact that now we've been relegated and probably been overtaken as it stands right now in the current status of English football by Peterborough, who seem to be a similar club who are doing similar things at just the third tier level. Yeah. So, like, I don't know, continuation and progress is, I think when you call it progress for the nature that it's not everything at once. It is a continued process that you go through. But I think completely going against that just kind of really stinks of someone who hasn't outlined a business sense for the club and expects that it's a sausage machine where I feed in money and success comes out.
Yes, yeah.
I really resent. I mean, I kind of agree with all 3 points that were kind of brought up as examples. Like match day experience and the feeling of like I remembered very clearly, and I'm sure you have the same thing. You mentioned the wristbands from a previous kind of regime. I remembered going down and spending some money on Clobber and felt like it was going towards a project I supported. It almost weirdly feels a bit now like how like Patreons are. Yeah. Like you have a Patreon and you support artists or podcasters or people who produce things on different levels. And you feel like you're giving money you're supporting someone whose work you value. Yeah. Like, it weirdly used to feel like that, but it's when it's done so cynically.
It's also the level of money involved. Like if there's 20,000 fans showing up, putting money in, and losses are within the kind of imaginable realm of a few 100,000 or things like that, you can immediately see, 10 more lots of 20,000 adds up to 200,000. That's what there's a level where money becomes unreal. And I think that's the realm we're in now. Most championship clubs are losing ridiculous sums of money, like unimaginable 10 years ago, the sums of money that they're all.
Mm-hmm.
And as we've talked parachute payments to death, but that all that does is allow even more extravagant losses. It means you can go from tens of millions of pounds to £100 million of losses over a period of time. But I think that's part of it, is like when you can't see your place in that. I think that's the thing with a Patreon. Oh, they've got 1,000 people that follow them and we're all putting in £3. Well, that means they're making 3,000 quid out of this a month. That seems like a reasonable thing, but it's also, I feel, valid and valuable as my part in that. My £3 actually does something there. If there were 100,000 people, I'd feel like my individual contribution is so much smaller, and maybe I would be less. I don't know. I feel less like I'm giving something back directly to the artist, or it's not quite as direct. And I just think we've gone past the point of imaginable realms in terms of the money that's wasted within the championship. The losses are so huge and extravagant now. Even at the acceptable end, what you're allowed to lose is just crazy money. And therefore, as a fan, a punter turning up, my bit in that, I find very hard to see. I'm a drop in the ocean now. And then also to be told I'm a drop in the ocean really exacerbates that feeling. Yeah. Whereas, as you say, I live in Chester. I've got the local club. Chester here is in the Conference North. They put on money so that they could. They put on a crowdfunder so that they could make a program for their playoff game last season. That is a direct. They've got a squad builder fund, so we want to raise 100,000. It will be spent on 2 or 3 players. Like that is, I can absolutely see what I'm contributing there. If I wanted to kick them tenner or whatever, I can see I'm playing a part in something there. Whereas my money doesn't really do anything. If the club is losing 50, 60 million pounds, why am I paying double for my season ticket? Like, it doesn't make any difference. Everybody paying double for their season ticket doesn't make any difference to that. It's the realms of the imagination are just stretched. It's beyond credulity how much money is getting wasted. Which I do think makes it very hard. It does feel like a significant shift away from that community club type thing. And you also couldn't have, I know that the club has had hard times, and there's still people with living memories of the kind of Save Our Owls type thing. And we've had bucket collections at Hillsborough for Rotherham as well. So, I mean, it's kind of cyclical in some ways. But, I mean, imagine the size of bucket you'd need to save Wednesday at this point.
Yeah.
Chuck everything you own into a dumpster, and maybe if everybody does that, we might scratch the surface of the debt that Chansiri has built up during his tenure. It's wild. I think, to come back to the original question in terms of that initial spend and the feelings about it, and maybe it could have, I think absolutely it could have been spent better, and probably in terms of investment, we're probably not talking about masses of investment to improve the training ground, improve the academy facilities, give the ground a lick of paint and new. I think there were some efforts. I mean, obviously we got the screen. I think there was like I think everywhere was painted. I think we did get some new chairs in and things like that. Obviously, we've got this lovely big white Chancery across the north stand that we didn't used to have. So some money has been spent on the ground in some way. We've put that big tarpaulin over the away end. So rather than fix it in any meaningful way, it's now got we put a cover on it. So that's good. I think there's been bits and pieces. I I think if you spoke to the average fan and you said, I've got £5 million, I can put 3 million into fixing up the training ground and the academy and 2 million into the stadium, or we can buy a new striker, I think fans will always go for a striker. I think most fans have a surface relationship with a football team, which is I turn up, I want to see football on the pitch, and therefore we are pretty base in our needs and wants, and that is we'd like to see the money that's going in on the pitch. I think the bigger problem with the Chansiri era, and again we've maybe done this to death, but it's what we spent money on. It's the lack of churn, because we talked about Brentford. There are good teams that have a kind of pyramid style football setup that is pretty reliable and forward thinking. They remove themselves from some of the whims of the modern game by looking ahead a couple of steps rather than just reacting panicked in the moment. Mm-hmm. And I think Swansea used to be a good example of that. Maybe they're still a decent example. It's certainly not a huge city, and they have a fairly successful football team, but they're the only team in that city. Brentford, this model of we know we're going to lose the best couple of players every season, but we've got a kind of shopping list. If player X goes, we've got player A in to drop in. We've scouted them. We know they're going to do the same sort of job for us. And as you say, Peterborough do that at a lower level. They sweep up all these non-league sort of talents and give them a chance to shine. And they make huge amounts of money selling them on to Championship and Premier League teams. So you can spend money on players and also make money by spending that money. If you buy very senior pros at the end of their year, their tether, their career, get them because you've given them an extra year, they will bleed you dry and you won't see any return for it. Mm-hmm. The big if of Chansiri is that if we got up, maybe we would have seen some investment in those other areas. It was trying to get up for the minimal investment was what we tried to do. We tried to do it as cheap as possible.
Exactly. Yeah. And
it failed. And there was no planning beyond that. So that is frustrating. I think if we knew now the situation, if we knew then the situation we'd be in now, I'm sure there'd be a few more words of caution. But again, I no longer feel as a fan I've got much control over things.
No, but again, is that purely like it's purely more of an illusion type factor, isn't it? Really? I mean,
probably, yeah.
But I mean, I don't think. I think the interesting thing is still, even though we're doing that, if you've taken a discipline idea that, hey, we're going to do this to do this, it has been frustrating to see players basically kind of outlawed from the club. But then typically any offer we got was never particularly deemed good enough. That seems a big waste of money. That there are signings that haven't really made sense. They felt like they made sense a certain time, like a player like David Jones. Seemed like it would be something that it absolutely disastrous. But then again, we signed David Jones and then apparently had offers to let him leave the club, and that didn't happen. Alman Abdi
apparently had offers to go elsewhere, and we didn't accept those.
Exactly. I kind of think with the fan experience and the matchday experience, like there are things that you can do to increase positivity.
Yeah.
Like here's the thing. Like recently, we're not. During the summer months, we're downing tool on looking at any sense of news, and it's very hard because it's hard to talk about the news anyway because it's very hard to get any sign of anything coming out of the club. We're still, as we record this, there's still there's great confusion over whether wages are still being paid.
Yeah,
like as far as we're aware, we're still under a transfer embargo. Under a transfer embargo, there's still things that technically we can do, but it's not looking possible right now.
No,
there are so many questions, and we're so close to, having a place come back from whatever holidays they could do within this environment, to come back and get back preseason training ahead of the 2021-2022 season campaign.
Yeah.
And it's funny because I think the thing that we typically forget is it's so easy to think about every step and tidbit of negativity. And I'm not saying that, an interesting link to what we're talking about here as part of this question, going into talking about local journalism, because we're focusing on Alex Miller's book. I don't think that there's any kind of great thing to blame. I think they're just trying to do a job and trying to feed people news. I don't think there's an agenda to make things even worse. I think they're just kind of representing what's kind of going on right now.
I agree with what you were saying. I think journalists, the local journalists, get accused of a lot of things, including being negative all the time. But the picture is a bit bleak at this point in time. And if you're just reporting what's there, that's life. And yeah, life goes on. There's these positive things do come out. It's just this absentee owner aspect is very hard to take. And actually, we've had that when it was a UK-based owner as well. I remember long periods where we just felt like the team were, or the club was in complete free fall and things weren't happening. And it was Dave Allen, and he was, I believe he's sort of lived all his life in Chesterfield. So it doesn't necessarily relate to the fact that the owner's in Thailand, but it's that being present and being a voice and being around. It does go somewhere, and we just don't have that at the moment.
But doing that again, I think going back to Benjamin's question is like,
very,
very simple, basic things that we can do that are small investments that lead to bigger outcomes.
Yeah.
Like, giving a mentality that you're maximizing the mentality across Wednesdayites that, our money is worth something is a positive thing. If there are any upgrades they can do to the training ground that help the injury situation, then that's a win. That's money that you're saving on the money that you're spending on wages, because, if Jordan Rhodes is injured, we're still paying Jordan Rhodes X to the tune of 5,000 figures, pounds a week, whatever it is, whatever astonishing amount. That's, whatever you can do. There are things you can do to improve situations.
Oh, yeah. And a lot of PR, wins, for want of a better word, cost nothing.
Yeah.
It is just, it's just making the right noises. And fans are pretty easily pleased. We want to hear that the club's massive and we're doing fine. We're pretty easily settled for things when we get told we hear the right noises out of the right people. No, it's interesting because I think that was one of the sort of prevailing. I'm trying not to use the word narrative, but it's all I've got. One of the prevailing sort of narratives through the years has been, Chansiri would like to spend more money. He's really, really rich. He wants to spend more money, but is held back by financial fair play. But actually, the sort of in the wider investments that we're talking about, improving the ground, community projects, improving the training ground, improving those facilities and the educational facilities there, all of those things actually don't fall under the FFP. You can make those investments. They are kept aside from the rules around spending. The rules around spending are mostly around those direct first team football spends. So there's just the presumption there is if he had the money previously, he wasn't willing to spend it in that way, or as we're maybe finding out, maybe the pot was a lot smaller than we all thought it was from the very off, which is why you do the almost sort of fly by night route of signing a lot of 30-year-olds and who have got the right credentials, but they have not very many legs left, and hoping to get, drag yourself over the line, kicking and screaming for that minimal investment. Because we did spend some money, but actually the money and the success didn't necessarily go hand in hand. Because I don't think we spent wads of cash that first season, maybe on wages, but we weren't handing out we weren't making big signings for money by and large. 2-3 million here, which is pretty par for the course for the championship.
Mm-hmm.
We supposedly spent a decent chunk on Reach, who's one of the very few exceptions to that old crusty end of career signings that we were making by and large. And obviously Rhodes was tons of money, but that was the January of the second season under Carlos. It's intriguing. I mean, there's so many what ifs and moments that you can look back on and see, if things went slightly a different way. But I have to say, my fan side of things, I would rather see the bulk of the investment on the pitch. I know that's short-sighted. I wouldn't mind the investment on the pitch with a plan is what I would like. That's what I would have liked to see, ideally.
Yeah.
I cannot get that excited, and I don't think maybe an improvement to the training ground does mean less injuries. I sort of doubt it, but who knows? If there was tangible benefits that I could see fairly early on, then that's great. And obviously, we all would like to see more youngsters coming through the academy. But I don't know. I don't know what investment there looks like. I don't know why we're held back from why we see so many more products coming from Sheffield United, for instance, than we see coming through our own academy. I'm not really sure what the reasoning is behind that. If that is investment, then yeah, maybe some investment there. But by and large, what I want to see is a better product when I go and pay my money as a customer, as I'm informed that I am in this situation. Yeah, we're paying Angus burger prices for the standard burger, or maybe even an extra value burger at this point in time. So we've had another. Are we happy to leave that one for now, Luke?
Sure, sounds good.
Okay. Well, thank you so much for the question and the compliments. I particularly enjoyed the fact that you weren't really sure at first, and gave it the time. So thank you for persevering. Yeah, that's very kind of you. So we've got another question, sort of a question from Paul. It's more of a kind of fun idea with some questions that spin off the back of it. So this was inspired by the fact that we last time out we talked about the documentary 4-year plan, which covered QPR's ascendancy to the Premier League. And left at the high point, which I guess is the same thing you would do with a Sheffield Wednesday film. You would end at the at Wembley or with the penalty shootout about to happen. You wouldn't complete the misery by showing the fact that actually we didn't get over the line. You kind of leave the what if hanging. But he then goes on to imagine a book or a Netflix show derived from last season for Sheffield Wednesday, with the various plot twists that he lays out, the high expectations despite the 12-point deduction. Remember Dunkley saying that we were sort of promotion. We were in the promotion conversation despite that 12-point deduction. The fact that the fans were absent because of COVID, a middling start to the season, and then the point deduction being reduced. The manager having a 10-point week but still getting sacked. Old school Tony Pulis coming in and disparaging his team immediately as he came through the door, acknowledging their lack of skill whilst saying that they're trying hard. Second manager sacked after only one win in 10 games. Key players suffer injuries. A star young player signs a new contract in Scotland and is ineffective for the rest of the season. Interim manager raises hopes and raises the team out of the relegation zone, only to go on another losing streak. The absent chairman suffers cash flow problems, doesn't pay the players repeatedly. New manager comes in but suffers from COVID and isn't actually able to attend most of the games. And then relegation comes down to that final game and the final moments, and Wednesday being safe for all of about 15 seconds. And then obviously the team dismantled as we head to League One. So he sort of says, would we have a hard time believing it if we didn't know it was true? I think yes is the answer. There were so many things that happened last season that were inexplicable and unbelievable, but they did happen. What do you think of that idea, Luke? A Netflix documentary based on last season? I think we differed previously when we talked about the Sunderland documentary. I said I'd love to see something like that about Wednesday, and you said you wouldn't. Is that right?
Yeah, I think I'd still be embarrassed. I think I'd still be, the heat from my face would be heating a good portion of Calgary, from seeing that thing. But I mean, from an outside perspective, I think it's a little bit funny. I think it's a little bit like, we provided some good drama this year for the external people. Like, there was kind of talk about, I think it was listening to the Ars Americas, and they were talking about like they had some people there had some friends of different kind of football clubs who were kind of texting. I think it might have been Paddy, texting Paddy and saying, oh, this is commiserations, but I think they were enjoying watching Derby and Sheffield Wednesday having this relegation shootout, and who could blame them? Like it's top quality kind of relegation porn, so to speak.
And I imagine Sky couldn't believe their luck.
Yes, exactly. I mean, well, considering you looked elsewhere and there was just zero narrative in the championship.
Yeah, there was nothing. Everything else was pretty much sewn up, wasn't it? Even all of the playoff places were sewn up. It was just who finished where.
And that was pretty much the case in the Premier League as well.
Yeah.
There wasn't any kind of really great last day joys to be had, especially looking at Man City, who, had the departing Aguero. It's a long time since Aguero scored the winner against QPR to win the title against their neighbours Man U on the last day of the season.
This is obviously not particularly Wednesday related, but so I found that kind of bizarre. I know there's all sorts of reasons behind the scenes, but we had Pep crying about how wonderful Sergio is, but at the same time, he's the guy that has made the decision to not keep him on as a player at the club. And Klopp did the same thing. Like, he said some wonderful things about Wijnaldum, but he's the guy that's made the decision to not give him a new contract. What do you make of that kind of those situations? I'm just trying to find Klopp's words on Wijnaldum.
I think that's fine, because I think we've seen that as Wednesdayites, right? We've seen typical things of like, we love you, ex-player, we're really going to miss you. But, the bit we're hiding is like, but beneath this, you are knackered and old and cannot give us the juice anymore. Which was the case with Aguero, effectively, right? The guy had a very injury-stricken last year.
I just don't think Klopp's ever liked him.
Well, Klopp and what's his chops is something else, I'd say.
Pep got. I don't think Guardiola's ever liked Aguero. He's never really shown much faith in him.
Well, maybe not, because I can see a mentality of saying you want something else or something different from your main striker. But I think that's fine to just go ahead and like cut people slack and show some sentimentality, but ultimately not the sentimentality to keep a 32-year-old on for another season or 2 seasons.
I think it's. I mean, I suppose it is fair enough. It's just it's the tears of like, he's such a wonderful person, and it's like, well, you probably could have given him another year if you love him that much. But I guess that's better than not saying anything as people leave, which is what Wednesday have done in the last few seasons. Your family, you can't go anywhere, and then you'll see your contract's up, and it's just like radio silence.
Yeah, I know.
But Klopp said about Wijnaldum's 30. He's was a big part of Liverpool's team. He said that this wonderful, joyful, selfless person has done for our team, I cannot sum up in words. We have built this Liverpool on his legs, his lungs, his brain, and his huge, beautiful heart. That's a huge amount of praise for a guy that you've decided isn't worth the money to sign for another year or two. But I suppose it's nice to be nice to people, and Klopp is a very kind of emotional manager. So I just wondered what you thought, because I found I just found it a bit two-faced to be like, oh, they are. Do you know that guy? Incredible. I'd love to keep him around. I mean, it's not. It is entirely my decision, but if we could have one more day with Wijnaldum, that would be a sweet day indeed. But he has to go. Again, purely my decision. I don't know. Maybe I'm being too cynical in my old age. And as I say, it's much better to be over the top and gushing, and maybe still have some friends in the game rather than just shuffling people out the back door without any acknowledgement whatsoever, which is what Wednesday seemed to have fallen into.
I was going to say, if we did have a documentary, I'd really, really want Jarvis Cocker to narrate it.
I thought maybe Tom Wrigglesworth, because he's a vaguely famous Wednesday fan as well, the comedian.
That would be good. That would be good as well.
Bring some levity to it. But I think Jarvis Cocker is a good call. And obviously, theme song by Hawley.
Sure. Yeah, he could do something twee but better than the twee thing for the Sunderland documentary.
Yes, yeah. Any ideas on a title?
I don't know.
And if it was Netflix, I guess Wednesday Till We Die would work as a kind of brand, a bit like Last Chance You. If you got Sunderland Till I Die and Wednesday Till I Die. But no, I'm not. I'm scratching my head on terms of what that would be. Oh, well, I would love to see it. I look forward to getting more information about this period in the club's history, because I just
you'd imagine, which I guess is the interesting thing to link us onto what we're talking about today a bit later. A few minutes time, or now. There's a lot of material. There's probably an absolute ton of material of things that we don't know, and it'll be really interesting to see when it finally comes out in the wash. Like a thorough investigative book on the Chancery era would be very interesting.
The worry is it's all sort of non-disclosure agreements, and nobody's allowed to say anything for pains of fear of death. But hopefully there'll be a day where those run out, or the right people pass away, and we get to hear the details. I was wondering about the story behind the inside story of Cakeball. How late in the day did that idea come up? Whose idea was Cakeball? All these things.
I would like a Great British Bake Off about doing a cake ball.
When you're doing a cake ball, the real problem is it might just all fall apart. You've always got to think structure when you're making a ginormous cake ball. Cake ball.
Cake.
Think about your base cake. You've got to have something stodgy. A Victoria sponge. Some people will start with a blancmange, and you're onto a loser from the very off.
Rich Hollywood.
Baking's blue-eyed boy. Do we want to? Sorry, go on.
Should we move on?
I was going to do the same thing. There we go. We were so in sync that we clashed. That's in a way, it's a beautiful moment, isn't it, Luke?
Sure.
So we watched the QPR documentary. We had a 2-week, we didn't have a podcast last week. We were building up to this podcast. The aim was to read Alex Miller's book 91, the inside story of Sheffield Wednesday's 1990 to 91 season, with a foreword by Ronald Atkinson. I should have made a start that first week. I didn't, and I've got to chapter 5. I'll be honest.
Okay.
I found it a bit a struggle, but you didn't. You've rifled.
In terms of, I also probably said I should have started probably the week that you should have started, but I did manage to go ahead and kind of rifle through the book over the last kind of 2-3 evenings.
Do you think you've got sort of? Do you think studying English gives you special skills in that regard?
No, because I was actually notoriously bad at reading books in terms of time for. Okay. I remember trying to cram some Frankenstein in a drafty student toilet before going into a seminar once.
That was just the drug of the time. It was the spice of that age. I'm really worried about this exam. I'm going to cram some Frankenstein in this toilet.
Oh dear.
So I think so. Do you want me to give my excuses first?
Please do. Yes, you lead off with your excuses.
So, I don't do a lot of actual book reading. I am a kind of audiobook person, quite a big podcast person, but obviously that doesn't count as a book. So, active proper reading. Don't do so much. So I think I'm well out of practice with that. So that's my first excuse. Okay. This book, and I applaud the decision, but not available on Amazon, and therefore, as far as I could tell, not available in an ebook form, because I think that's probably my next favorite thing, because I can kind of cram in a bit like Frankenstein in a drafty toilet. I can cram in a page or two on my phone. I don't need to carry the book with me if it's on Kindle, for instance. But that said, it's a nice sort of weight and shape of a book, a pleasant thing to wield, and it's not particularly long. So I am a bit. I apologize, and I am embarrassed for my my inability to finish my dinner in this regard. 223 pages for the main schlep of the book, not including the kind of tail end acknowledgements and things like that. So it's not arduous by any means. So the reason that this season is picked out, I'd imagine for most folks, is obvious, but the 1990-91 season was the last bit of silverware that the club picked up. We won the League Cup and also won the second division, which I guess is the championship nowadays in the rebrand of things. And it was just on the cusp of, there was lots of talk of a Super League, wasn't there, Luke? So this Super League turned out to be the Premier League. So what you wanted to be was, you wanted to be in the door before the club closed, as the idea. So getting relegated when we did at the end of the 89-90 season was pretty poorly timed, and there was a bit of a race against time. So that's the reason for focusing in on this. So I don't know, how do you want to tackle this? I've got some notes for the chapters that I've looked through, but
how about we carry there, and then I can kind of chime in, and then maybe just pick up and carry on from there effectively.
Okay. So the first thing is Big Ron's introduction. Obviously a charming and ebullient character. One of the very first people to be cancelled, as far as I'm aware, as well. Obviously, that's not dwelt on in the book in any real way.
From what you read?
From what I read, yes. Although he did very early doors mention that Carlton Palmer was a friend of his, so he's getting that kind of most of my friends are black justification in that a lot of racists use straight away. He mentions in the introduction that we're the best team ever to get relegated from the first division, which is a very Wednesday backhanded compliment claim to fame. At the time, the only team to get relegated with 40 points as well, so it was a record high point total to get relegated with, and that's kind of part of the scene setting. So the prologue is that prologue and the wooden scoreboard. The first chapter are looking at the events at the end of the season. I just put in part. The prologue just mentions in passing that the season in question, we scored 103 goals in 60 matches, which, given the sort of very thin gruel we've been served up as Wednesday fans of late, just sounds ridiculously outlandish in terms of a number of goals. I mean, that's almost 2 per game, and we're lucky to get 1 every 2 games at this point in time. The Monk years and the various characters since. So, prologue sets the scene a little bit. Did you have anything from Big Ron's intro?
It's interesting that the foreword from Big Ron is tinged with a touch of Wednesday disappointments. You know, we can't ever really enjoy the moments of what they are, can we?
No.
You know, there's very much a mentality and a focus from, you know, it's interesting because we go in to look at and interview all of the players. I mean, I was really glad to see a few people who are very prominent names of that squad in that time and that era who've come back to Wednesday and had continual disappointments from what's happened to them. So first of all, let's talk about Big Ron Atkinson. Already within that forward makes a reference to him basically having some kind of being subject to revenge from Dave Richards.
Yes.
for his second stint as manager, Wednesday manager in '97. I think we all know it was purely done to kind of really stick it up Ron Atkinson for after the end of the season, jotting off to his beloved Aston Villa.
Yes.
But it just feels a bit like, I mean, this is the thing. The book is very good for giving so much feeling and emotion and talk about everything that happened during that period and that time.
Yeah.
I think we can look back and still say, I think that is the argument of the book. But I still think we typically focus ahead of time and say, in a very Wednesday fashion, these are the people who were kind of done a little bit harshly by the club. So those other people, Chris Turner returns. Chris Turner, League Cup winning goalkeeper for Wednesday. Danny Wilson is interviewed.
Yeah.
And in more recent times as well, David Hurst, who I think we all seemingly know that he has a lot of issue with the club over how his son George was treated.
So sort of ongoing burning of bridges. This seems to be a bit of a Wednesday.
It seems to be, but I think the big thing that I got from this was just and this is more, we can still carry and go back through we'll kind of slightly chronologically go through this. I actually stopped making notes after about chapter 6 because I'm very conscious that we did a podcast last week, which was about a documentary which we pretty much laid out all of the moments that happened and all of the comedy that was within there.
Yeah.
I kind of want to lay off this a little bit because I kind of want to keep the powder dry for if anyone wants to go out and read this, because I think there's a lot here to enjoy within this. So I don't want to spoil too much about that. So I'll talk kind of quite generally about it. But I think it was really pleasing to see all these characters talk about what a great time it was in Sheffield Wednesday's history and what a great time it was to be a footballer for Sheffield Wednesday and be part of that squad and part of that kind of family of friends that they had there.
Yeah. Well, I think that's fair enough. I think it's a fair instinct, and people, if you're interested, I mean, the chances are we will, just by the nature of talking about this, we will sort of we will talk about the odd thing that you wouldn't know without reading the book. So if you're interested, probably the thing to do is to pause the podcast at this point and go read the book yourself. It's available from the publishers at a fairly reasonable rate. So it's verticaleditions.com if you want to go and purchase it for yourself. It's, as we say, it's a reasonable length of volume, so it's not going to. And
your copy will probably be put in the post and posted you by Piggy Journo Danny Hall as well.
And that's how he addresses himself on the postage notes, which is.
You don't know. And then it gives the address for return in case it doesn't get to you, folks.
Oink oink. Yours sincerely, Piggy Journo.
Little paw print for the signature.
Or a hoof print.
Dips his trotter into some ink.
Oh dear. Well, I mean, you can. I suppose I have made notes through my sort of section, but it sort of swings and roundabouts a little bit. So the prologue, I just expressed sort of amazement at the 103 goals in 60 matches, and then there's a nice chunk that sort of sets the scene for the book ahead. So lost in the shimmer of glory, certainly lost in the 3 decades that have passed. Our memories of the times the 1990-91 season weren't so great. Of the endless string of drawn games, the changing room rows, the injuries, the fact that the league title hadn't quite been achieved. This is the story the book sets out to tell. So, that's kind of scene setting. I then got notes. The first chapter, which details the last day of the season and the relegation, is called Wooden Scoreboard, which is interesting because it's more last day drama involving Derby. So some of the parallels to this season that's just been are writ large at that point. I've a book based on lots of research and extensive interviews, even going as far as to interview ITV's Nick Owen for the all-important Luton Town view of Wednesday, the day Wednesday were relegated in 89-90. Nick Owen, it was a pretty good value talking head, I think, for Alex in writing the book, because he pops up several times to add a little bit of an outside perspective. So the season that we went down, own goals were our third top scorer. That's pretty incredible. Behind Hurst and Atkinson, it would have been. There's a phrase which I'm not sure I've heard previously used in that chapter, which is called bottom belly nervousness.
That's pretty interesting.
Is that just talking about pooing yourself?
I don't know. I wondered if you. I don't know. There's a few turns of phrase which I'm just going to be a little bit critical of that kind of came up. That was a bit like, really. I don't know if it's just me. I think saying that Nigel Worthington had a left foot that could do a crossword.
I wrote that
was a bit much. You wrote that down as well. I thought that's the thing you were going to talk about at first. So
yeah.
The thing I will find is like that there's some definite need to, and then I think Carlton Palmer is described having an accent thick enough to stir his Guinness.
Yes, I also noted that down. Described as having a black
also noted that
accent,
down as well.
Thick it could be used to stir a pint of Guinness.
Yes.
Was he specifically noted as being a Guinness fan, or is that?
I don't know, but I think it's more the narrative and keeping with the theme of, hey, these lads that drink, you know?
Yes.
Which hilariously, I would have liked to have kept the powder completely dry into coming into this to talk about this, but I must say I really, really enjoyed some text I shared with Rich last night. Could you expand on such a topic, Rich?
Well, I don't. So I want to encourage the endeavour of a journalist taking the time to write about our football club in detail. I think that's one of the things you suffer from is a bit of an anonymity in the world when you don't support Man United or Liverpool, or one of the kind of charmed few football clubs that have huge societal acceptance. You don't get quality in-depth coverage about your thing. So I think on some level I don't want to I didn't finish the book in part because it was a bit of a chore for me. I'll be honest. So I gave the lifestyle reasons. I also wasn't dragged along by the narrative. I think propulsion is sort of important in reading through a book, and I didn't feel propelled particularly. But I think the same thing that I was struggling with, Luke enjoyed, which kind of shows you, opinions like bottom belly nervousness. We all have them, and. But so I think the exhaustive nature, I felt like this could do with a good edit. Luke has liked the fact it's sort of exploring all the corners and having all those conversations. So I've chancing upon this mention of Nick Owen, I sort of was making a bit of a running gag. It's like, go here we go. Here's Nick Owen again. What do I care what Nick Owen thinks or thought? That was kind of where I was coming from, but it shows that everybody has been spoken to. If somebody bought a paper off the lad on the corner, we've found the lad on the corner and we know what the lad on the corner thought about selling the paper to such and such.
Right.
That is good, thorough journalism, and it's great. Great effort, well done, Alex. But there are certain things I just found a little bit tedious, and one of those was these are people that like a drink, and within the first chapter, I think I'd got fed up of the different synonyms for wanting to have a drink, liking a drink, and I just sort of summed up various chunks of the book as player X, who loved a drink, by the way, was great friends with player Y, who didn't mind a tipple. And when they got together with player A, let me tell you, they drank some drinks. The other thing that comes up again and again is this kind of saviour figure of Ron Atkinson. the next coda to my little bit of a rant to Luke was Big Ron was like, is that too much drinks? But he secretly knew it was just enough drinks because he was a great man manager. There's several, I don't know how many times we need to be told and by how many people we need to be told that Big Ron was a great man manager. We heard it from him. We heard it from a member of his support staff. And I think comfortably in the first 3 chapters, there's about 6 players that mention that he was a great man manager, which I get, good. He was a very successful manager. Maybe not as successful as he could have been, should have been, but more power to you. But yeah, there's an ongoing thing. This is a squad that really did indulge in drinking. For the most part, it seems to be one of the things that kind of bonded them together, which is very positive. And that so several of the stories are around that. If you enjoy the Under the Cosh podcast, I think there'll be lots of sections of this book that will absolutely tickle your pickle because that's a similar sort of thing. Like, I mean,
I don't know how much of this, Rich, is just like this is telling the nature of the era. Like this is a different time for football. I mean, the thing I was thinking about today when I was thinking about this with like kind of contemporary football is like, I feel there are so many things in modern life, kind of the life we live now, which we're not kind of experienced enough to really have a good understanding of how it kind of goes. So I think it's interesting to look at that era of football and be like, well, they were just lads, if they went and they did the stuff on the pitch, then what's the issue?
Of course. And there's no judgment, really.
No, but I think, unfortunately, maybe there's a sadder narrative to look under that and say that these people were successful, so we excuse their alcoholism.
Yeah.
Which is something else completely. But I don't want to go there because it's, it's again, it's a little bit like, well, there are other players who can do that, but probably not be as good. So, like, unfortunately, it kind of hides the fact that, they were successful on the pitch.
I think there's never the examination of, well, how good could they have been if they weren't? Because there's a little touch of this in the kind of pre-season coverage that they shared a hotel or a villa with an Italian team, and it's like, oh, they were in bed by 8:00 and it was only pre-season, and there's almost like a sniff, like it's like a kind of reverse snobbery from British. I mean, British people are weird about alcohol anyway. Like, if you do not drink, that is you are in many ways a social pariah, and it's you need to explain why you don't drink and things like that. And like, there is this kind of like, oh, those bunch of weirdos that turned out to like beat them 5-0 or 6-0 that weren't drinking and just having a lad's holiday. And there's also the Waddle tells a story about when he turned up at Marseille and they had a fridge that was full of water, and then by the time he left, it was half water and half beer. Like, that was
yes.
I won them round. They saw the sense of having some beer in the fridge, which is fine, but it's like, yeah, they are professional athletes. They're increasingly well paid for what they do. I guess at this time that was not quite the case. You were well paid at this stage, but you weren't like.
But is there like a difficulty with like the modern footballer's life? Is like we've not kind of. It's difficult to kind of acclimatize to. But also, I think there's a difficulty that people said, like, it's also difficult for young men who are given so much money so easily
and nothing to do. That's the thing.
And nothing to do. Yeah.
They're done by 1:00. More often than not. Like, they have a lot of time.
Yes.
Lots of money and boredom is a bad combination.
Bad little cocktail.
Yeah. Which, by the way, Phil Taylor bloody loved. No.
That was the comment, wasn't it, when in the hotel and the Italians were playing chess in the chess in the foyer? Was that?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Like, I go on, what?
No, I just it is interesting, isn't it? It is very much a cultural difference.
Yeah,
which me and you are part of, right?
Oh, absolutely.
There's still like an element of that.
It's the assumption that
just today I was having a conversation. Having a conversation with a nutritionist to be like, well, how I was like, well, if I'm having acid reflux, what's the thing of alcohol? It's like, well, it's not particularly good for it. It's like, how much alcohol do you drink? And then again, it's that standard question that I feel as an Englishman I'd come into every time I go to a doctor and be like, well, I don't regularly drink X units of alcohol a day, but I will go and binge drink once every 2-3 weeks.
Yeah.
Right?
Did you see that? That was
I will have.
Sorry, Prince Harry was like talking about, I really got into some very, it's quite sad, and I got into some pretty troublesome drinking. And then it's like, so what happened? Well, I wouldn't drink every day, but every couple of weeks I would probably have about 10 units. And you're like, so like everybody else. That is literally like 90%.
Like everybody else, yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Yeah, I say
there's a British mentality and culture to be like, we're going to go out on the lash. We're going to fucking do this up.
Do it properly.
Yeah.
Well, that's it. Because when I'm asked that question,
no half measures or half units.
How many units do you have a week? And the average week, none. But if I have some units, I'm having some units.
Yeah. Having some units. Let me tell you.
Let me tell you. Colin Palmer liked some units back in the day.
But tell me what podcaster A, would go out with other friends. Oh, they like some drinks.
In that sort of relegation chapter, I did also touch on. I did make a note. Touch on a peculiar Wednesday trait of being surprised by what, in hindsight, seems a bit more obvious. This unthinkable relegation followed a season where the Owls had stayed up on the last game of the season. Like, the story of the chapter is like, this team of internationals with their famous manager couldn't possibly have ever thought about being relegated. And it's like, well, the season before you were almost relegated, maybe a bit of forward planning, you might have seen that's a pretty likely outcome the next time as well.
Yes.
We also had Alan Biggs described as mustachioed, which was rather fun. I wrote the Who Done It unveils Alan Biggs disguised under a fake mustache, popping the Wednesdayite bubble again. Because we won't go into the story, but the last game of the season does sound mad in a particularly bafflingly old-fashioned way, including the wooden scoreboard. So there's a couple of bits of unfortunate planning or fortunate planning in hindsight that the end of season players sort of end of season awards were immediately after the relegation final whistle blew. So players had to go in and have dinner with fans at their table, which I bet was great. I bet that was so good. And then they also went on this Jolly Boys trip to Marbella immediately after, the day after, basically, being relegated. Big Ron, not a drinker. His tipple of choice was tea. The weirdo.
He should have had some units.
He should have had some units. I also I noted down, this is Holiday Blues I'm into now. Carlton Palmer described as a social hub, a one-man forerunner to MySpace or Bebo. And I enjoyed the fact.
I loved some of the really like knowing writing, like the brilliant line about Bing Ryerson. There was something about the piano bars and moored super yachts that Atkinson rather enjoyed.
Well, I loved like Marbella being set up as this glamorous upmarket playground to the moneyed, and then slightly let down by the fact that he describes multiple times that they had to go over the dual carriageway to get there.
That is fantastic. It
just made me laugh. It's just so like humdrum in the midst of this. Like, there's sort of, you're imagining Monaco, but it's like, we just, all you need to do.
Run over, vault yourself over when there's no traffic, risk your life.
Hop over the cycle path and then through the fields with the sheep in, and then you're in the middle of the millionaire's playground. A hilarious story about tapping up Danny Wilson, just early doors. A conversation that didn't happen, but happened. Yeah, I just put a note like wringing any enviable value out of his chat with Nico, and he pops up again in this chapter. Anything else on Holiday Blues?
Oh, was that when Paul Williams comes in, or was that later?
I think he was on like the second, because that wasn't really a pre-season trip, was it? It was just a piss up essentially, and then they went on a pre-season trip to it where they played it. Well, the south coast of Italy, I think.
Whenever Paul Williams comes in, did you love the fact that Paul Williams saying you remembered just how well tanned Big Ron and his wife were?
Yes, I did love that. I think that might have been in the next chapter, Scallywag, potentially.
Oh, Scallywag. The most... I feel like the word Scallywag was liberally overused. I mean, it was quite fun. I can see why Alex Miller did it.
I wrote that. I wrote about that chapter. Kind of a whodunit. Who is the Scallywag? And then
are you saying who is the real Scallywag? Are you suggesting that there's a different Scallywag? Is it?
Well, you didn't. It wasn't. You say Scallywag was liberally used, but it wasn't for about 2/3 of that chapter. There's no mention of the Scallywag, and I was like, oh, we're really building the drama here in terms of who is the Scallywag.
But it was Shaz, let's be honest.
It was. It turns out to be Sheridan. But Big Ron doesn't like nice boys or villains, but he loves one or two Scallywags. We find out.
Fantastic.
Ironic, seeing as he left us for Villa, that he says he doesn't love villains.
Doesn't love villains. I know, hilarious.
But that's a kind of that's one of those man management moments from not to spoil it from Big Ron. One of his genius man management moments involves the Scallywag Sheridan and his late night escapades. So I've got some notes on yellows, and then that's me for my notes. But I'm happy to kind of leave myself in your hands from that point on, if that's the way to work it, Luke.
Sure, yeah. I mean, my notes dwindle out as well because I think I got to the point of I needed to focus on finishing the book, and I didn't want to spoil too much, and I didn't want this episode to just be us kind of just making a patchwork quilt of all the things we enjoyed or didn't enjoy for others.
Yeah, well, I suppose that's the thing as well. It's a different way of doing, like watching a football match and making notes on it is different than just watching a football match. Same with the film, same with reading a book. So that's another thing that maybe the idea would have been just to sort of read it through and then maybe pick out selected highlights afterwards. But
you think, just as a kind of overall arching conversation and just about things that we think about, do you think, the fact that we are kind of English and British and there are still hang-ups of culture that kind of lend ourselves to things that we look at, Rich. So the interesting thing I want to kind of bring up in regards to that was, within that yellow chapter, I noted the old-fashioned joy of setting players' targets. Love it.
Yes.
That was one thing that I think me and you, even though, I think we probably pine for something a bit more kind of modern and kind of forward-thinking. Like the element, remember the times of Megson.
Yes.
Giving players targets.
I think everybody in the squad had a goal target under Megson, didn't they?
Yes, they did, and it was a similar deal under this as well.
Yeah, it was like
looking back at this side, they make a lot of noise about, which I think should be made a lot of noise about, but that seems to be, again, similar to the drinking thing. There seems to be many things that kind of crop up very repeatedly, and that's Pearson, Nigel Pearson and Peter Shirtliff having, just bagging a whack of goals between them.
Yes, yeah.
Pearson getting like 12 or something for the season. Something ridiculous.
It's extraordinary, really is. And that's a nice thing. Is the football, doing it, playing good football, and that being a kind of stated aim, seemingly from the off, is something that is all too rare. Always in football. I mean, pragmatism is feels like a first port of call for football teams at almost all times. So even in the midst of this kind of surprise crushing relegation, the dedication is to playing better football, scoring more goals. It's not batten down hatches and get through it, which is that's a lovely thing to hear. And I hope it was as kind of painless and obvious as it seems to have been in retrospect. I just noted down in terms of that the Yellows chapter. Phil King described as a fun-time left-back. And then also unable to fight the voices in his head, which is slightly more disturbing. Another bit of genius big Ronnery. Worthington can't pass down the line, so because he's in pain due to a groin injury. Try passing inside. Worked like a charm. Worthington scored. There's a lot of Big Ron is the hero, basically. He's Superman of the book fairly often, at least in these early chapters. There's also a weird, just to speak about odd turns of phrase. There's a weird bit here. It's Williams talking about being a Southerner. I might struggle to find it now. Basically, he says that Southerners Northerners revere Southerners as soft, and I thought that was such an odd. That's not how you use revere, is it?
No. Revering is a positive. Yeah.
Yeah, here we go. I came from London, and my impression from the outside was people from Yorkshire revered people like me as Southern softies. That's just struck me as very, very odd because I'd never heard the word revere used in that way, and maybe I shouldn't have ever heard it. That's kind of me in terms of my notes about things. So take us home, Luke. I convinced me that it's a good idea to see this out and see this project through and finish it and polish off the book.
So I guess like the real joy of looking at this book is there's a lot of characters at the time. They're made to be characters. You know, they're supported in being characters, so you get those stories, which leads to the narrative about players liking drinks, right? And it now leads to those stories.
Yeah.
Which is fantastic. I think the sheer weight of the season, the fact that we have so many characters that Wednesdayites love as great, amazing players, just really adds, you know, here we are on the 30th anniversary, looking back at the cream of the crop of that early 90s crowd and compilation of players.
Yeah.
I think adds just so much value to it. I mean, that's the interesting thing is like, there's a lot of meat. There's a lot of stuff to go here. So I think Alex Miller does a very, very good job, I would say. I'd be a little bit critical of some of the thing I found was early on, like some of those weird turns of phrase. I think they're peppered at the beginning, but I think when you get some momentum and get into this book, they're either less of them or they just kind of get blurred with the pace that you're ripping through this book. It's a real jaunt when you get going. So I do share that little bit of criticism about that. I felt that Alex Miller did a brilliant job of mapping out the season and kind of structuring that, of which there's a couple of things that I want to kind of focus on. Firstly, like I bring up those characters. The big thing I want to say was I think I speak for myself and probably a lot of people. I love John Hawkes.
Right, yes, yeah.
He's a very, very charming man. And there's a lot of great stories about him coming into the club when he came on trial with Tony Meola.
Nice.
Who, you have a brilliant line from Ron Atkinson where basically they came on trial and they wanted them to stick around for a bit longer. Tony Meola says he wants to go off and try some clubs in Europe. And then I think Big Ron said to him, if it's not Big Ron, it's another character within the club. Juventus, more like Frey Bentos. As he was the chunky man. I think Tony Meola was like there's been a rich vein of, this was kind of interesting to sort of look at these people that they're the beginning of the Americans coming into the sport and kind of still not being very revered. But I think there's still a big focus on John Hawkes for his Scottish parentage. Yeah. Like having a mentality that like he grew up in a place where football was accepted and he kind of grew up watching soccer matches in the local Irish bar type thing.
Yeah.
So that's nice. I will say, for a little sprinkling of pretentiousness, Rich and I are both huge super fans of the best podcast in the game, Doughboys.
Yes.
Every episode of Doughboys, it's two American comedians reviewing chain restaurants. The host, Nick Weiger, does a very, very kind of academic Wikipedia type storytelling about introing every chain restaurant they do, linking them to some event or sometimes a formation of the company. Rich, I will urge you to go and have a look at the beginning of chapter 6. It starts with a description of the Clark Fred Company going from Scotland to the United States. Very doughboys.
Oh, nice.
Very, very doughboys.
Okay, excellent.
There's also there's a lot of talk with, I think the bit I like is like when you start to go through this narrative, you afford yourself the space and the time to go off and kind of focus on about characters coming into the club. So I really like John Hart's kind of coming in. There's also a great little story as well. I'll try not to spoil too much else. I'm keeping this really at a minimal, I will say, folks. I could have done this and just ruined the entire book for everybody. But there's a brilliant bit about how John Harkes is meeting Trevor Francis.
Okay.
Trevor Francis had a period during, like a lot of the UK professionals around, late 70s, early 80s, coming to the States and playing a few games in the kind of boom of the MLS. I will say, if there's a documentary we could watch, Rich, which would be an international one, Once in a Lifetime, I think it's called. It's about the focus of the growth of the MLS in the 70s.
Okay.
And, talking about Pele going there. And, you have some brilliant bits like Rodney Marsh was there.
Oh, yeah.
He was hilariously interviewed by the American media saying that, people are saying, Rodney, that you're the white Pele. Well, I actually think that Pele's more like the black Rodney Marsh. Attempts at humor, which apparently didn't go down very well with the American media when they came out with that. I don't think they kind of really saw the English kind of humor as part of it. So there's a fantastic bit where John Harkes shows a picture of a young John Harkes meeting Trevor Francis. And so that is an amazing piece of story. The bit that's even better than that, Rich, is the revelation that Francis was confused by it was even better.
Brilliant.
So there's some really good stuff through there, I will say. Yeah. One chapter I want to focus on, which I thought was really interesting, was talking about we shift the focus to talking about purely just the straight first team. And he actually talks about Wednesday had a quite successful youth team who actually, I think, won the FA Youth Cup.
There is, that's mentioned early doors a couple of times as well, isn't it? Which is interesting, tying into our talking about spending money away from the first team, because successful throughout the club. So sorry, go on.
So it's interesting because he then goes and focuses on, he sets up a narrative which you can see what he's doing, which is basically saying they're up against Manchester United. One of them is a young kid named Ryan who has a world at his feet and is talented, does all these. The other team has Ryan Giggs. So they're focusing on, you remember Ryan Jones. Do you remember Ryan Jones as part of your kind of, me and you are the same age. We both came to
vaguely
Wednesday, that kind of young age. But Ryan Jones was a very, very promising young Wednesday player who unfortunately had a series of very drastic injuries and retired at the age of 23, which I think was probably around 1994.
Right.
But again, was someone coming up through. And I think we kind of forget like some of those characters from the youth scheme because they look at David Weatherall, John Newsom.
Oh, yeah.
Graham Hyde as well.
Yeah.
Graham Hyde, very, very good player considering.
Oh,
he kind of came through the ranks at Wednesday. And that was a really nice detour, I must say. It was really nice to see Ryan Jones talking about being really thick in the midst of that Wednesday youth side and just like how long the days were and like a different era. But he's just said, I think as he said, puts it himself, he's like, me and my friends were just bouncing around the stadium all day. We were getting there at 8 a.m. and leaving at 10 at night type thing. And there's also some fun little bits and bobs about them getting hand-me-downs.
Okay.
That kind of, getting some really bad boots.
Nice.
Type thing like this. But they absolutely loved it. So that was really good. I found it like very, I found the emotion hit when it did. It's very touching. I think it'd be difficult to write a bad book about this era. I think Alex Miller, like I said, I think does a very, very good job with this. There's just so much material. And in someone like Big Ron Atkinson, you very much have a character, I do take it with a pinch of salt, and I see your point. Like, he knew that it was just enough drinks. That was a great line from you, Rich. But there's so much good value for this, and it speaks to a lot of Wednesdayites who I don't specifically remember this era so well.
Yeah.
But the fact is that there's a number of characters around this who kind of carried on in a prominent feature during to the time that I think like Rich and I, when we were kind of 9, 10 in the early 90s, that comes into the 92, 93, 94 season and kind of mutates from there. So there's so many very well-revered characters.
I mean, Big Ron is it's an overused phrase, but he's a larger than life character. Like, he always stood out. It's hard to imagine. He stood out even in his second sort of run of things, which was almost sort of 10 years later. How much he would have stood out in the 80s and early 90s is wild. This, well-dressed, loads, sovereign rings, and I mean, it's essentially like a sort of Del Boy type character. I mean, it's fascinating in the same way that Redknapp was a fascinating character because he was a man out of time. Big Ron must have been a bit ahead of his time, I guess. So yeah, no, it's great to know that there's so much value in him as a character, because he does absolutely. I mean, he's always stood out.
What a good connection for us to kind of link the two things from this week and 2 weeks. Last episode we did 2 weeks ago. This is about the time that kind of you start looking at Oxford United being run by Neil Warnock. So Colin is present at the beginning of his
bursting onto the scene.
The beginning of his nastiness, like your Star Wars prequels, chronicling your boy Darth Vader.
He's had enough of feet, and now he wants to shape football teams.
Exactly. So it was really good. I enjoyed the forward from Big Rankson's nice. It's nice that it's tied off at the end with Alan Biggs. I think it was a really, really good read. It really rips at a pace. It's well structured. It gives a lot of. I think the thing that was really touching for me is it gives a lot of heart to those players that I think we've forgotten a bit of, how much, I think in a weird way, how much Wednesday means to them. They draw an allusion to the fact that how Ron Atkinson was looking to bring in 97 Pearson as a protege, as his right-hand man, and that never materialized. And Ron Atkinson it's kind of insinuated, not a quote, but Alex Miller kind of puts it that was seemingly the thing that has maybe been more of a damage to Nigel Pearson's reticence to ever manage Sheffield Wednesday.
Because he's already been burned.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah. It's very, very interesting. I think it's just so nice to see players talk so well about what a great time it was for them being at the club. It wasn't just purely just the manager let us get pissed and we had a good laugh.
Yeah.
There's clearly something a lot more there, which is kind of is picked up on, but kind of left more as a kind of running thread throughout the narrative.
Okay. Yeah. That's good to know. I mean, I think that's what you want to. There's a bit of Schadenfreude when you see these things about pop stars being miserable and things. But I think by and large, your heroes, you want to know that they were having a great time too. They loved it as much as you. And that's a nice thing to have confirmed, isn't it?
Exactly.
For all the tortured souls and things like that we hear about in artistry. It's no, it was great.
Right. And it's difficult to kind of, maybe that's a unique thing for us as Wednesday, as football fans, that we have a club that we adore. And, there's a degree of adoration, idolatry for some of these characters who are the best at it. And it's nice when you get those moments where you see people enjoying it so much. I mean, maybe we've had a little bit of that ourselves, right? We talk about Sam Hutchinson just looking absolutely made up with himself.
Yes.
And it's hard not to love those moments.
Yeah.
Yeah. But it's interesting because it makes me think there's very few people who we seem to celebrate when they're happy.
Isn't that why we love Bullen? Bullen was not a wonderful footballer, but Bullen got it. Bullen loved it.
Yeah.
Wednesday was the absolute peak of his career, and he got it. He got why it was big. He got why it was exciting. He got that it was rare to be there. And that's what we as fans watch football players on the pitch, and at some level we are embitterly jealous because it's like you are literally doing. But if I got a call from Darren Moore, who has lost his mind, and said, "Do you know what? Next season, I want you to wear number 9 for Wednesday, but you have to give everything else up," I'd do it. Like I would do a terrible job. Maybe I'd worry about how bad I would be for Wednesday. Like at this, Darren, what are you telling me about the situation at this football club? That this is, I'm your choice for a striker. But take that all away, it's what all of us, we were playing in parks pretending we were Wednesday players. When we scored goals, we pretended we were doing it with a Wednesday shirt on. And I think the players who get how privileged and special that position is, and actually that doing it at Wednesday is a bit special as well, those are the ones that we take to heart. And I think obviously for these players with the success, these were the beautiful glory days for them in the same way as the glory days for the club. And it's not many people get success again and again and again outside of and particularly that period of time. I think there was a lot more of an even playing field in terms of winning trophies and having a successful football club. So to be involved in multiple successes at different clubs was rare. To be at a club that had multiple successes itself was rare. So, yeah, no, that's a lovely thing. I think if it captures that, that's something that will inspire me to sort of keep plugging away. Because if it does capture that sort of rare spirit of that shared adulation, then that sounds like something worth persevering with. I suppose to an extent you could talk, but do you feel comfortable with the place we've reached, or do you want to have a closing thought, or do you think that's as good a place as any to kind of wrap things up?
I think it's as good a place as any. I really enjoyed it as a book. I'd wholeheartely recommend it personally.
Good stuff. No sponsorship here. There's no code to use. You can go and pay the publishers full price and make sure Alex gets rewarded for his hard work interviewing all the characters involved and piecing it together. Well, that's good. That's really good. I think as a kind of to not end this episode of Different Gravy on a cliffhanger, I'm going to keep plugging away. So maybe I'll report back at some point later on my closing thoughts. But thank you for that, Luke. Thank you for your enthusiasm, and thanks for doing what I couldn't and pushing on and finishing off the book. I'll try and be less rubbish in future.
Okay. Stop sucking, Rich. Very good.
You're such a good man manager, Luke.
Luke knew that it was
Rich was. He was sucking, and then I was like, "Why don't you stop sucking?" And then he was better.
Luke knew the right amount of abuse to give Rich.
Oh dear. Some need an arm around the shoulder. Some need their head given a wobble.
Exactly.
Did you like the thing that Big Ron used to slap people around the back of the head? That was his fun thing to do.
Yeah, it's a different time, wasn't it?
Different time. It was a different time. Oh dear, I might stop doing that. Just clip people around the back of the head.
Give them a cuff around the back of the head.
Oh, good stuff. Well, thanks for that, and thanks for listening at home, folks. And we'll be back in a couple of weeks. But for the meantime, I'll say, cheerio. Look after yourselves, and we'll catch you again soon. Cheerio, Luke.
Thanks, Rich. Have a good one, everyone.